Hello viewers, welcome back. I am the Grumpy Penguin. Welcome to another episode of the Datsun Roadster SR20 Swapped project. So, yeah, it's been a while. I've had a couple of people ask me to make a video about the rear suspension on this car. It is obviously vastly different from how Datsun, Nissan shipped this thing from the factory. So what I've done, just for quick summation, and then we'll kind of dive into the weeds a little bit, is I have converted this car from leaf springs to coilovers, from from drum brakes to disc brakes, and from virtually no kind of rear end system to a triangulated four-link system. So let's break that down and kind of talk about each one of those things. As I change out some of these bolts off of this kit that I got, if I can get this thing out of there, good Lord. There it goes. So the first thing I did was kind of realize that the factory rear end is very inadequate for the horsepower levels that I was planning to run on the car ultimately. Ultimately, this is just going to be a much higher horsepower car from stock. And the first thing I wanted to address was the brakes. And I thought about making my own kit, and then I saw online Ron's Garage or Ron's Auto Accessories, I think is what it's called maybe. Actually, he already had a kit available, which was really nice for this car. So it utilizes Nissan parts, which I appreciate, and it uses basically S13 rear calipers and rotors. The only change I had to make to his kit was to flip it around because of my coilover location. That wouldn't be an issue if you had a factory rear end. So that obviously for safety, stopping power, this is going to be a tracked car. So yeah, I didn't need to do that. The next thing I did was say, well, the open differential is just not going to cut it. We're going to have way too much horsepower. It's going to lead to a lot of one-wheel peels and some really adverse handling characteristics that I really just didn't want to deal with. So there were some options. There's the unicorn differential from Nismo, I believe, or from Nissan Nismo. Absolute unicorn. You're never going to find one. So I actually ordered a brand new OS Gaiken two-way differential from Japan. That did take 8 or 9 weeks to get here. That was kind of mid-COVID. I've had it for a little while. So, you know, that's just I want to get the power put down to both wheels equally. And while I was in there, I replaced all the bearings and checked all the clearances and did all the kind of technical stuff that you have to do when you rebuild a rear end. But basically, I'm going to track it and run it and see if and when it breaks. I probably kind of assumed that as far as everything on the car right now, this is going to be the weak point, but that's fine. When it comes to that time, I'll do an upgrade and just see what needs to be changed. More than likely, that upgrade is going to be something probably domestic, like a Ford, either a Ford. I don't want to go to like 9-inch. That's way, way too big and heavy. You're just going to change characteristics of the car pretty dramatically doing that. More than likely, the RX-7 rear diff is also very popular. So if I could find one of those already made, I'd probably convert to that and then just re-weld on all these tabs. So, and let's talk about these tabs a little bit. So what I've done is I've converted the car to a triangulated four-link setup. And what that does, I actually used a spreadsheet I found online that kind of helped me engineer roll centers, instant centers, and all of that technical data. And working with a couple, as I said, friends of mine that are way smarter than me engineering-wise, I came up with a design that, you know, every suspension design is a compromise. So you're going to be kind of always compromising something, but you don't want to have certain characteristics. Snap oversteer is a really bad one. Center that is 6 feet under the ground, that's pretty bad. So what I've got and what I've designed was a triangulated setup, and the reason I went for a triangulated setup was mostly for packaging reasons. The there just isn't a lot of room back here, and I didn't want to cut the body all to bits, at least just yet. That may come at a certain point, but if I'm going to do that, then I'm just going to convert it to independent rear suspension at that point and be done with it and actually have a reasonable handling car. But to keep a live axle under here, this setup made the most sense. So what I did was the lower link is welded to basically where the front of the spring perch was. It's not in the exact same place, and I did cut off all those spring perches and weld on new tabs. So what I started with was an eBay kit, and I'm not going to put the link in the description, and I'm not going to call out a brand name because honestly I was pretty unimpressed with most of the kit. Really easy way to do that is you want to get some lasers set up and really make sure everything is centered and everything is measured. And measure twice, cut once really turns into measure 300 or 400 times and cut once. And then you just weld everything up and check to see if there's any bind. This actually has 0 bind with full travel without the coilovers installed. Obviously, the coilovers are only going to provide about maybe 4 or 5 inches total travel up and down. Probably not even that much, to be honest. I haven't measured, but and then with the bump stops, there's very little movement, and it's pretty stiff. I did go with a pretty stiff setup. I did not put a rear sway bar on the car. We'll see if I regret that decision. You can always add one later. That's just, again, got the welder, add it, start putting metal on. Everything is adjustable, so we can adjust I should be able to get the alignment dialed in with the way I want. And really the other big thing is making sure that your axle is centered left to right so you're not dog tracking down the road. But that will all be done when you do string setup on the car and make sure everything is aligned. The coilovers, moving on to those, they are QA1s with Hyperco springs. And yeah, and the last thing I'm doing today is just changing out the bolts that hold the control arms on, or the 4-link setup on. The bolts that came with the kit were long enough to go through, and then they came with a nylock washer, or a nylocked nut, and that's awesome. Nylock nuts are great. However, it seems like they spec'd the kit for a regular nut for length, and then went to a nylock nut, which has a lot more. They've added the nylock section, so it's a longer nut, and there was no thread engagement through the nylock, which is no bueno, not going to work. So I went out and just bought a set of longer bolts. These are also not really labeled as grade 8s. They're pretty beefy, but again, I went out and bought grade 8s just as, if we're going to have a failure point, I'd rather it not be the bolt. You know, maybe a weld or something may fail because, you know, I did it. I'm not a fabricator by trade. But yeah, I definitely wanted the nylock section engaged. You want a couple threads showing for that. That's pretty standard. So yeah, that's pretty much kind of where I've gone with the kit. This is mostly standard stuff. As I said, if you have any questions, just drop it in the comments below. I will try to get back to you, try to answer you with the best of my knowledge. And if the question is well past my ability, I'll try to ask somebody smarter than me. Always find a big brain to help you when you're doing these kind of projects. If you're an engineer and I'm going to kill myself, let me know. I don't think so, but find out. Anyway, thanks for watching. I know that was kind of a long example, and you watched me put, I think, all of 2 bolts on a car. So, but we talked about the design and everything else. So thanks for sticking with me with this project. This thing's dragging on horribly. I feel like it's just the project that's never going to end, but seeing it together like this gives me inspiration. This is light at the end of the tunnel. I'm hoping to have this thing running by spring. I'd like to take it out and take you guys with me doing some racing, doing some autocrossing. Take this thing to a grid life event and see what it looks like. Yeah, so anyway, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.